This circulation and exchange of ideas will, as Kant argues, slowly awaken the germ of the inclination and need for free thought that nature has cherished within its hard shell. End quote. So long as one does not actually try to change existing social relations or challenge the sovereign through any direct means, one may debate and postulate the most radical possibilities. This is the basis of Kant's famous reference to Frederick the Great's dictum, argue as much as you want and about whatever you want, but obey. We'll go to the next one. That's Humboldt University in Germany. The principle of enlightenment is thus confined, at least initially, to the realm of ideas, while the actual transformation of existing social structures and institutions remains a teleological principle rather than a practical goal. At the same time, Kant assumes that the sovereign will listen and eventually respond to the arguments of his subjects by changing or reforming the system of government. Enlightenment thus implies a kind of social contract in which the citizen must first demonstrate subordination to the state, a willingness to conform to its constraints rather than rise up and violently overthrow it. Upon demonstrating this capacity for civility and restraint, one earns the right to object to the policies of the state and the implicit promise that the state will consider these objections in turn. The process of enlightenment begins with the self-liberating actions of a small coterie of advanced thinkers. As Kant writes, there will always be a few individuals who are capable of thinking for themselves despite the established authorities. I'll give you the next image, a little coffee house action. There's some enlightened individuals having their coffee. Kind of like us. That's appropriate to run a coffee house. I like that. We are presented here with a notion of political transformation via the viral diffusion of beliefs or ideas, which has obvious parallels with the history of modern art. Both seek to produce a new form of consciousness in the reader or viewer, a subjectivity better equipped to meet the demands of modern quasi-democratic society in which long-established social hierarchies have begun to erode. In his influential notion of aesthetic education, Schiller will modify Kant's concept of enlightenment in two important ways. First, Kant's handful of enlightened subjects are reinvented as the artists and poets of Schiller's aesthetic state. Like the pamphleteer or the philosopher, the artist only enjoys sovereignty in the realm of ideas and the imagination. As soon as he seeks to impart reality to these ideas, to set in motion specific proposals that might produce actual transformations in the social order, this legitimacy is lost. And second, Schiller introduces a subtle but significant skepticism about the capacity of the public to achieve a sufficient level of enlightenment without assistance. Kant is remarkably confident in the power of free exchange and debate to shape an enlightened consciousness. Schiller, however, is less sanguine and takes the principle of deferral and temporal delay implicit in Kant's analysis one step further. It will require a process of aesthetic education, distinct from and prior to education per se, in order to reform the subjectivities of these new civic subjects. Before their formally political debates can be characterized as truly enlightened. The aesthetic emerges as a meta-ethical discourse that stands over and above normative political discourse, exposure to which is the necessary precondition for fully mature participation in the public sphere. Rather than viewing civil society as a realm of debate in which consciousness is formed and out of which change can occur via dialogue with the sovereign of the state, Schiller will argue that no meaningful political change can occur until human consciousness has been irrevocably transformed by the experience of aesthetic education. This is a very different matter. It sets in place a series of structuring oppositions around thought and action, or theory and practice, in which the production of ideas, or the invocation of specific beliefs, must guide and precede action in the world. Here, thought is creative and generative, while action is merely iterative, marking the application of ideas already perfected in the consciousness of the artist, the reader, or the viewer. These oppositions continue to structure art theory and criticism to the present day. So we've accounted for Bücher, but what about Geld? What role does money play in the process of enlightenment? For Kant, of course, it was essential. The ownership of property was a precondition for citizenship, and the expansion of trade, a necessary ingredient in the progress of European civilization. Today we are perhaps less confident that liberty and freedom are the concomitants of commercial development. In fact, Schiller's aesthetic already expresses an incipient attack on capitalism and offers one of the earliest critiques of the dehumanizing effects of the market system. The truth of art for art's sake, its positive and productive side, lies in its resistance to the tendency of the market system to subordinate all forms of creativity or knowledge production to the demands of short-term profitability. But in practice, this resistance often takes a more reductive form, collapsing the distinction between the instrumental and the merely useful. Thus, the principle of utility qua utility, the idea that a given form of knowledge production should have some efficacy, is simply inverted, endowing non-utility with an a priori ethical value. Thus, art becomes the embodiment of the unpresentable or the irrational, resistant to both economic and semantic exchange. You show the next 2 or 3. Here, art is either alibi, providing the sequestered spectacle of free expression and creativity in a culture otherwise characterized by routinized labor, or accursed share, the surplus extracted from the unforgiving means-end rationality of the market as a placeholder for a more fully humane social order. It's necessary, in my view, to recapture the initial critical moment of aesthetic autonomy. Its salience lies precisely in differentiating between the generic principle of utility, a problem that can be solved simply by defending non-utilitarian art for art's sake as an inherent good, and the particular model of efficacy represented by the market. The underlying limitation of the market as a system of social organization is its failure to provide any ethical orientation for action and the consequent reduction of all efficacious action to a simple calculus of profitability and self-interest. It's not efficacy or utility per se that is in question here, but the restriction of efficacy as a value only to those actions that create profit within a social order that is based on systematic forms of exploitation. In the context of UCSD, we might phrase the question this way. What value is there in the study of English or training in the creation of art or poetry, or for that matter, in teaching students how to understand the cosmos? Go to the next one. Shouldn't all learning be directed solely towards the acquisition of market-complementing technical skills that will allow our students to establish careers in the fields of medicine, science, and engineering? Or to carry this question further, why are some forms of research... Give me the next... There we go. This is from a recent LA Times article on tuition increases in the UC system, and these are some readers' responses. Or to carry this question further, why are some forms of research rewarded at the university and others are not? How is research oriented, in other words? And what notion of the public good underlies the broader paradigm through which research is carried forward? Have you had a chance to drink that in? Go ahead and give me the next one. There's another one. While the linkage between aesthetics and pedagogy, or art and education, has always been implicit in the history of modernism, it has been more openly thematized in recent years with what some have called a pedagogical turn. Part of a more general paradigm shift in contemporary art practice towards the participatory and interactive. The pedagogical turn has been characterized by the proliferation of alternative schools, from Salon Populaire in Berlin to Learning Site